Hey, welcome back again. My name is Dan Derry, and I'm the president of the Institute of Fulfilled Eschatology. Welcome to these videos that I call Answers on Eschatology. And in this video, instead of going where I wanted to go, where I told you we were going to go, which is we were going to look at the inheritance being fulfilled through the covenantal transition. Instead of that, I want to take one more video to pull out a couple more texts in the New Testament that clearly teach a covenantal transition in the first century. And I think we've established that fact pretty clearly in previous videos. However, we shouldn't really overlook these two texts, and they are powerful evidence for a first century covenantal transition. And I think these ones are just really the cherry on top of what we've already taught. So I want to do this, and after this, I hope, and I'm sure that we will get into looking at the inheritance. Okay, so let's jump into 2 Corinthians chapter 3, and we will read from verses 6 down to 11. And keep in mind, in this context in 2 Corinthians 3, Paul is teaching regarding the covenants, and he's comparing the glory of the old covenant compared to the surpassing glory of the new covenant. And he's been really, since for chapter 3 to chapter 5, he does this. He's talking about covenants. A lot of this stuff is misunderstood, but this chapter should be easy to grasp. So 2 Corinthians, and let's pick it up in verse 6. Who also made us adequate as servants of a new covenant, not of the letter, but of the Spirit. For the letter kills, but the Spirit gives life. Notice the comparison. The letter, old covenant, the Spirit of the new covenant. But if the ministry of death, that's the old covenant, in letters engraved on stones, came with glory, so that the sons of Israel could not look intently at the face of Moses because of the glory of his face fading as it was, how will the ministry of the Spirit, new covenant, fail to be even more with glory? For if the ministry of condemnation has glory, old covenant, much more does the ministry of righteousness, new covenant, abound in glory. For indeed, if what had glory, old covenant, in this case has no glory because of the glory that surpasses it, the new covenant glory. Now watch verse 11. For if that which fades away, old covenant, was with glory, much more that which remains, new covenant, is in glory. Now, verse 11 is what I want to hew in on here. Unfortunately, this NASB version that I'm reading from, this text is terrible in this version. Everything in chapter 3, verse 11 is in the present tense. This is how it should literally read. For if that which is fading away was with glory, much more that which is remaining is in glory. So listen, that changes the entire meaning of this text. He's teaching that the old covenant was presently fading away. Listen, for if that which is fading away was with glory, the old covenant, which presently at that time was fading away, was with glory, much more that which is remaining, the new covenant, is with glory. So again, we see in this text that the old covenant was in the process of fading away. Now listen, there's a perfect parallel between this text, 3:11, and Hebrews 8:13. If you recall from our previous videos, Hebrews 8:13 says that in speaking of a new covenant, he makes the old covenant old, and what is growing old, present tense, and becoming obsolete is ready to vanish away. So Hebrews 8:13 says the old covenant was growing old and ready to vanish away. 2 Corinthians 3:11 says it was fading away. The old covenant was fading away. Perfect parallel. Vanishing away, fading away. Okay? Now, there's another amazing parallel with 2 Corinthians 3:11. And that is a text in Hebrews chapter 12. So let's go there. Before we do, let's just read this one more time. For if that which is fading away was with glory, much more that which is remaining is with glory. Now I want you to remember the new covenant was remaining. The old covenant was fading away. Go with me to Hebrews chapter 12. And in Hebrews 12, the context is, again, the writer is paralleling the old and new covenants in this context. The entire book of Hebrews is a parallel between the old covenant world, the new covenant world, that which was good because compared to that which was better. Okay, now in Hebrews 12, it's in the same flow. There's a comparison of covenants, and let's pick it up in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 18. For you have not come to a mountain that can be touched, and to a blazing fire, and to darkness and gloom and whirlwind, to the blast of a trumpet and the sound of words, which sound was such that those who heard begged that no further word be spoken to them, for they could not bear the command. If even a beast touches the mountain, it will be stoned. What's that from? That's from Exodus, and it's repeated in Deuteronomy. This is the old covenant. He's saying you haven't come to this old covenant, to this place of an old covenant, okay? And so terrible was the sight that Moses said, I am full and fear of trembling. Listen, but you have come to Mount Zion. So they hadn't come to Mount Sinai that trembled and quaked and was on fire, literally, when God appeared to establish the old covenant. But he says in verse 22, you have come to Mount Zion. You've come to the new covenant, the heavenly Jerusalem, it says, and to the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem, to the myriads of angels, to the general assembly and church of the firstborn who are rolled in heaven, to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, and to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood which speaks better than the blood of Abel. So he says, you haven't come to Sinai, you haven't come to the old covenant. This was his message of the entire book. But you have come to the new covenant, to Mount Zion, to the heavenly kingdom, to the heavenly Jerusalem. You've come to the new Jerusalem through the new covenants. Now let's just jump down to verse 26. Let's just read 25. So see to it that you do not refuse him who is speaking. For if those did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, much less will we escape who turned away from him who warns from heaven. And his voice then shook the earth at Sinai. But now he has promised, yet saying, once more I will shake not only earth, but also the heaven. This expression, yet once more, denotes the removing of those things which can be shaken. Wait. Removing of what things? Old covenant things. The old covenant. And as of created things, so that those things which cannot be shaken may remain. Listen, remain. What couldn't be shaken that was remaining? The new covenant. Remember 2 Corinthians 3:11. Okay? The old covenant was passing away, and the new covenant, which had a greater glory, was remaining. Look what he says in Hebrews 12 regarding in the context of covenants. That which was being shaken, right? That was being shaken was the old covenant. And it was being shaken so that which could not be shaken, which was the new covenant in this context, would remain. The old covenant was being shaken away so that the new covenant would remain. And in that is a perfect parallel to 2 Corinthians chapter 3 and Hebrews 8:13, like we just saw. And look at the next verse. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom which cannot be shaken. What they were receiving through the new covenant which could not be shaken, which was remaining, was the kingdom of God. And listen, guys, the kingdom was to come in that first century generation. Jesus in Luke chapter 21 verse 31 says, when you see all these things begin to take place, know that the kingdom of God is near. And he said in verse 32, Verily, verily, I say unto you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. The kingdom of God came in power and glory in the first century, and it came through the new covenant, okay, that remained when the old covenant that was fading and vanishing away was removed and shaken and taken out of the way. Guys, I hope that just cements what we have taught in the last several videos, that there was in fact a covenantal transition. The old covenant was being shaken and removed and vanished away in order that the new covenant could be established. It was being established, and it would remain when it was fully established in AD 70 through the coming of the kingdom. God bless, guys. We will pick this up next time, and we will start our teaching on the inheritance through covenantal transition. God bless.